I'll never go camping again. I know that sounds dramatic, but after what happened that night, I can't look at the woods the same way. I can't even walk through a park without feeling my skin crawl. You might think I'm exaggerating, but after hearing this, you'll understand why I can't get the image of that man out of my mind. It started off like any other camping trip. A few friends and I went out to a spot we'd been to plenty of times before, deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. No cell service, no distractions, just nature. We had our usual setup: tents, fire, snacks, and a few drinks. Around midnight, when the fire was dying down, we started talking about the creepy stories we'd heard over the years. Everyone was joking around, but I could tell a few of them were a little on edge. I guess that's what happens when you sit in the dark with nothing but the sound of the wind and the crackling of the fire. I went for a walk after a few drinks. I wasn't thinking anything of it, just needed some fresh air. It's funny how your mind can play tricks on you in the dark. I had my flashlight with me, but the woods were so dense, it barely cut through the trees. I walked a little farther than I intended, but that was nothing new. I had done this plenty of times before, and I didn't think anything would be different this time. Then the silence hit. It's hard to explain, but suddenly the woods were deathly quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, not even the wind. I felt this cold prickle up my spine, like someone was watching me. I figured it was just the alcohol messing with my head. I was about to turn back when I saw him. A man. At first I thought he was another camper, maybe someone who had wandered off the trail, but as I looked closer, something felt wrong. The man was standing just outside the beam of my flashlight, half in shadow, half illuminated by the weak light. He wasn't wearing a jacket or anything like I'd expect someone camping to wear. His clothes were ripped, tattered, like they'd been through hell. His skin, it was pale, almost gray, as though he hadn't seen daylight in years. His eyes were wide open, unnaturally wide, fixed on me, but his expression was completely blank. No emotion, not even a blink. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I should have called out to him. I should have asked if he needed help, if he was lost, but I couldn't move. It felt like I was paralyzed. There was something about him that felt wrong. Then he took a step forward, slowly, with deliberate slowness, like he was savoring the moment. That's when I snapped out of it and bolted. I didn't even turn around. I just ran, and I ran hard, crashing through branches, tripping over rocks, not daring to look back. I could feel him behind me, though. I didn't hear footsteps, but I felt this presence, like someone was breathing down my neck. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When I finally made it back to camp, I was out of breath, my face pale. My friends were still sitting by the fire, laughing, completely oblivious. I must have looked insane when I told them what happened. "A man in the woods?" they asked, laughing. "You're just drunk, dude." But I knew what I'd seen. I stayed up the rest of the night, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. The silence had returned, and every time the wind rustled through the trees, I felt my stomach twist with dread. I kept expecting him to appear again, just standing there, watching. But he didn't, not that night. The next morning, we packed up and left early, but as we were loading up the cars, I noticed something strange. There on the edge of the woods was a single boot. It was old, worn out, and covered in mud, but it was the same color as the man's clothes. My heart dropped. I walked over to it, feeling like I was being drawn to it against my will, and that's when I noticed something even worse. The boot wasn't alone. There were more things. A torn jacket, a pair of pants, a weathered backpack, all scattered across the ground, like someone had been living out there for years. I picked up the backpack and without thinking, opened it. Inside, I found old, faded pictures. Some of them were of a family, smiling, happy faces, but others were disturbing. People who looked too happy. There were pictures of children, sleeping children. In one photo, a young girl was smiling, but her eyes were black, hollow. I froze. One of the photos had a date written on the back, October 13th, 2019. That was the year before. My mind was racing. Why had I never seen these things before? How had I missed them? Then in the corner of the bag, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small, folded-up piece of paper. It had a single sentence written on it in jagged handwriting. "I can hear you, too." The last thing I remember is looking up and seeing something move in the trees. But it wasn't the man from the night before. It was a shadow, long and stretching, crawling across the ground like it was coming toward me. I ran without thinking. I didn't even look back. I just threw the backpack into the car and drove away, speeding down the road like I was being chased. I couldn't stop thinking about that piece of paper. I can hear you too. I know what it means now. He wasn't just watching me. He wasn't just some lost camper. He was listening, waiting. And when I think about that last photo, the one of the little girl with black eyes, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't just seeing him that night. He was hearing me too, and he's still out there. I've never believed in creepy coincidences or supernatural stuff, but after what happened to me, I'm not so sure. It all started with a random text message. A number I didn't recognize. It simply said, "I know what you did." At first, I thought it was a wrong number or a prank, but then I got another one. "You can't hide from me." Every day, more messages kept coming, and they weren't just creepy, they were personal. They knew things about me, like where I worked, my favorite coffee shop, even the names of my friends. I blocked the number, but the messages didn't stop. They kept coming from different numbers. A few weeks into this, I started hearing things. I'd be in my apartment, alone, and I'd hear footsteps outside my door, or a knock at the window. No one was ever there. My neighbor, an old lady, told me she'd seen someone standing outside my window late at night, staring in. But when she tried to call the cops, the figure was gone. The text kept getting more specific. "You're not alone," it said one night. "I'm closer than you think." I had enough. I called the police. They took my phone records and checked the messages, but they didn't find anything unusual. Then the officer asked me something chilling. "Have you checked your phone recently?" Confused, I asked what he meant, and he said, "Look at the messages." I looked at my phone. The last text I had received wasn't from any number. It was from my own phone. It said, "You're in the house now, aren't you?" I dropped the phone. It was true. My phone had been hacked. Someone had been using it to send messages. But the worst part? I knew the next message wouldn't come from a phone. It would come from inside my house.